You know when we're there. We are live. We are live. Welcome, 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 everybody. Come on into the room. We have a special guest today. Special guest. One who has an extreme level of expertise. We'll get into his books and his current profession and how he has helped the body of Christ throughout the years. But especially wanted to have him on in light of COVID-19 and how the church can be adjusting, preparing, and readying themselves, looking at those church growth principles that he have mastered throughout the years and see how which ones apply more or apply less in light of COVID-19. And then certainly in the midst of our climate, as once again, we are faced with upheaval, civil unrest in our nation, but not just our nation of late. We see that the world is protesting, standing against this injustice that occurred. And it is my prayer, my hope that we will keep that passion burning, continue the dialogue and perspective, different perspectives to get at one ultimate goal, which is that the dream of King, that everyone will be treated a certain way, not based on the color of their skin, but the content of their character will not be a nightmare, but an actual dream. Dr. McIntosh, I want to give you a second to say whatever on your heart as it relates to that, and then take a moment to say anything else about your ministry that you want to add as well.
George, good to be with you. It's a crazy time to be in ministry right now, but an opportune time. And I think we're all in shock as to what happened with George Flood, and it's just there's no words to to say to his family or to anyone about what happened to him. I mean, it's outrageous. And particularly for us who are Christians, I mean, it's just unbelievable that something like that can occur in the United States. And I and all of my friends, I mean, we're just in shock about it, and just pray for his family and pray for our country that we can, meet, some of the dreams of Dr. King, but also, really reflect the love and compassion of Jesus Christ to our world, our lost world. So
well, definitely. One of the things that us as African American people realize is that this has been going on throughout the American social experiment, and we understand that this has just been filmed. And what I hope is that more people will realize and dig into the history books. Brian Stevenson, who just had a movie based off of one of his things called Just Mercy. Jamie Foxx, Michael B. Jordan was in it. Has in Montgomery, Alabama, a lynching museum that he has, and it traces lynching all the way to the new Jim Crow of today, which is the judicial system. And it's something that right before this all broke out, that I was planning a trip with our young people there. And I think that is a good base to start with, where people seeing that what we saw on video has been taking place a lot, and those cries and those screams of can't breathe and for help has been taking place in our community, and still is at this very moment because of some structural things. And so I appreciate you taking time to address that with us. I didn't want to get in and have this conversation without acknowledging that reality that we're facing.
It has to be said. And the Martin Luther King Museum in Atlanta is fabulous. I have not been to the lynching museum. I would love to go there one of these days, but I've been to the Martin Luther King Museum, And I've even taken one of my sons and grandsons and three of my granddaughters down there. And it's a fabulous museum. I don't know if you've been there,
I
but
have.
it's fabulous, and it
Yeah.
shows a lot of the film from the early marches, back in 1958, 59, when Martin Luther King started marching and stuff. And, I think this is particularly important for this next generation. My generation, I'm a baby boomer. Um, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, came of age in high school in the 60s.
Wow.
And, so all of this was a major part of my upbringing. But, for my kids and for my grandkids, this is all new to them. And I don't know if you've seen it, but where I live, there's been some peaceful demonstraration. I would say it's mostly high school kids out in the demonstrations up here anyway.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me the other day, they've never seen something like this before. I mean, I grew up with it. I lived in Colorado. We didn't have quite the challenges that they had in the deep South, but for this younger generation, this is something they've never seen before. And so, it's a challenge. And like I said, I wanted my grandkids to see the Martin Luther King Museum. So I took them down there, and, I think it was quite an education for them.
Absolutely. And those are the type of things that we need to do
Yeah.
more, and especially those from the majority race as yourself, to enlighten the next generation. So thank you for sharing that. All of this, ironically, is taking place with what we would have said a couple weeks, couple days from now is just a unique time, a historical time, a world time of this pandemic, COVID-19. You have been at the heart of ministry throughout all of this. Take us back to some of the mentorship that you have been providing to those that have called you during this time, some of the things that you have been doing to sort of navigate the kingdom through this pandemic.
I was a pastor, of course, many years ago. And the Lord called me out of that. Literally, that's another story. But I assumed I would be a pastor the rest of my life. But the Lord opened the door for me to become involved in consulting and coaching churches and pastors. And that was 1983. So it's amazing to me. We're looking at 37 years now that I've been involved in coaching and consulting. I was about 36 years old when I first started, and you can add up the time to see how old I am. But it's just amazing. As I look back now, I realize God put you where He wants you. He works through human circumstances to move you around in ministry. But I ended up eventually as a professor at Talbot School of Theology, Biola University. I've been there 35 years. And that's opened up more doors to coach pastors and to consult with churches. And so now I'm one of the old guys in the consulting coaching field, and can look back, through many years and see things that have happened. And you're right. This is a strange time with COVID-19, the sheltering in place, governmental requirements and all that. This is something we've never seen since about 1918. My grandfather actually was in the military in 1918, and he remembers the 1918 pandemic flu epidemic that was here and had gone around the world. And I remember him telling at least one or two stories about that. But now it's interesting to see this, and I think by and large churches have done well. The pastors' churches have really pulled together. They have become innovative. They've many of them have jumped into online services, and churches that didn't have online have bit the proverbial bullet and jumped in there and done it. And it seems like at least viewership of worship services is higher than total worship attendance was before this.
Yeah, that's interesting. Talk to me about what you are hearing pastors as they come to you in COVID-19 of being concerned with as it relates to the virtual reality. I know those numbers and things being up is sort of skewed because we don't know if these are people watching for 30 seconds or 5 minutes, or if they put it on and now they're in the kitchen cooking. And the discipleship aspect of it is mysterious during this time. Talk to us about that component.
You are correct. One of the, several of the questions, how long are churches expecting people to be online before they get counted as a worship attender? And as you just mentioned, some churches are counting a person as an attender if they just log on even for a minute or two. Others are saying that a person needs to be on for at least 20 minutes. And I think that's the best criteria that I've heard. If a church is able to really determine how long people have stayed with them online, I think the best qualifier is, have they stayed with us 20 minutes or longer? If they stay less than 20 minutes, it probably means they maybe listened to a couple of the worship songs and maybe just the opening part of the pastor's message, and then they logged off. And certainly if they only log on for 1 or 2 minutes, and it's really not proper to count them as a worship attender. But that's one question. Another question is, how many people are getting counted multiple times? For instance, this last Sunday, my wife and I actually attended 3 different churches. I went to church in New York City. And I went to church in Sacramento, and I went to church in San Diego. So my wife and I watched 3 different worship services. Since I'm a professor, what I've been doing is taking the opportunity to visit some of my students' churches. And one of my students is Bo Lee, and he's a church planter in New York. And he had a special message today in light of the murder of George Flood. And so I wanted to see him and what he was doing with his church and how he was speaking to his audience there in New York City. So I went on church at 8 to see him. His church service was 11 o'clock, but 8 o'clock in California, 11 o'clock in New York. And then I had another student who's down in Atlanta, Georgia. So I went to his church, and then I went to a church here in San Diego, but all online. So if those churches are counting, I got counted 3 times. And what I've heard is that most churches are saying that for every person that's online, they're multiplying that by 1.3. And that gives them a good indication of how many total people were watching. So in my case, my wife and I were sitting on the couch together watching church services. But in, many families have maybe 3 or 4 people. My son, I know up in Seattle, when they go to church online, there's sometimes 4 or 5 watching online. So, but the number I've heard that seems to be an accurate number is, take the number of people who are online, multiply that times 1.3, and that gives you a reasonable, accurate estimate of how many people, are actually watching. But, the question I was thinking of is, I probably got counted 3 times. So when churches report all these large numbers of people watching, some of them are probably watching multiple churches and getting counted multiple times. And of course, then we're also getting visited by people in other countries.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting visited by people in other states. And as you know, it's hard enough to disciple the people that are attending our own worship service, let alone people in other countries. But you know, you were talking about some of the principles, some of the church growth principles. There's two of them that pop up in my mind with COVID-19, this situation. The first one is called the principle of receptivity. And what Donald McGavran, who founded the church growth movement, discovered, he was a missionary in India, but he discovered that around the world, whenever there are major challenges like we're facing right now with COVID-19, that people become receptive to the gospel. Because for sure, COVID-19 has showed us we're not in control. You know, we always think we're in control of our own lives, of our own destiny. But what COVID has showed us, just like other worldwide events, 9/11, things like that, it tends to cause people to think about God. It tends to cause people to think about their need for guidance outside of their personal selves. And it tends to show them that they're not in charge. So I think right now there is a major receptive moment in the life of many people's lives where they are hungry for answers. They're hungry for spiritual answers. And if we can help them hear the gospel of salvation through Jesus Christ, many of them, I think, will believe. Because I think right now they're hungry for that. So I think pastors need to make sure that they properly present the gospel in their messages and call people to a decision. You know, now's the time to make a decision for God, for Jesus Christ, because there is a receptivity among people right now. And I think that's why so many people are watching churches. Many people who would not attend the church are watching church online. And I think that's because they're hurting and they're hungry for answers. And even this, the protests that we're seeing right now, you know, as Christians, we understand that the ultimate answer to these problems like racism, the ultimate answer is the Holy Spirit coming into our lives and changing us. And that comes through faith in Jesus Christ. And I think that a lot of the people who are marching are hurting. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but you know that people are looking for answers, and we need to do what we can from a human perspective. And yes, we need to change our social structures and that sort of thing. But ultimately, the answer is in Jesus. And so I think pastors have got to make sure right now that they clearly present the gospel of salvation in Jesus Christ and call people to repentance, call people to a decision of salvation, because people are receptive.
Absolutely. So number one, you're saying there is this call that still needs to take place, to still translate the call to Christ, the call to the gospel, because people are more receptive. You said there were two. What would be the other one?
The other one has to do with relationships. The number one reason people visit a church and stay in a church in person is that they have friends or family or a network of people there that they know. Now, right now, with being online, what I'm seeing is that the best churches are working very, very hard to create online small groups, online communities. The larger churches are actually hiring a full-time online pastor. And the main job of that online pastor is through email and connections like that to connect people who are watching online into small groups where they gather together maybe once a week in a Zoom meeting or some sort of online platform where they can get together with 6, 8, 10, 12 people and talk together and share together and pray together online. So I think right now that's a key thing. You know, I don't know how much longer we're going to have to be sheltering in place. It looks like we're beginning to open up and being able to come back and meet in person. But I think as long as we're online, we need to work very hard to get people into online communities, online small groups. And I think if they make connections there, and if they geographically live close enough to your physical location of your church building, that when this is over, that they will at least come 1 or 2 times to connect. And if people in their online community can invite them to come and simply say, why don't you come visit our church? I'll meet you on the front steps at 9 a.m. or whatever. I think a lot of these people who have never been to church will take the risk of coming because they know somebody from the online community. So I think the whole principle of assimilation, of assimilating people into the church, it's a relational principle. People come to church because they know somebody there, because they've been invited. I mean, all the research has been done since way back in the 1950s, and there's been multiple studies show that the main reason people come to church is friends, family, or work associates. So if friends invite other friends, or family invites other family members, or work associates invite other work associates and give them a personal invitation is the number one reason people come to church. So if we can create these online communities online, and people get to know each other online, and then some of those people can invite the others that they've been online with and say, hey, come to church, I'll meet you there, and let's go out for lunch or something. You know, I think we can leverage this for good biblical church growth, you know, that will connect people, and we'll be able to stay connected with some of these online people so that we can disciple them.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Listen, can you tell us about things that you're watching as an expert online? You're watching these various services. What is standing out to you as that's good, that's translating, and what are you standing out that you're saying maybe are weaknesses or challenges as it relates to virtual worship?
I think that churches are quickly seeing how far they're behind and how weak their technology is. Some churches didn't have the bandwidth to send out their services online. Some churches found that the cameras, the sound equipment, and the lighting wasn't up to being adequate. So I think this is probably a good thing because technology is changing, and churches have always historically adapted to the technology. And I think a lot of churches are learning from this experience that when we're going to have to upgrade our technology and improve our lighting, purchase better cameras, purchase better sound microphones and sound systems and stuff for online. I really hope that churches do not stop doing online. We've been forced to do online. I think when we go back to meeting in person, most churches need to continue to do online. It's similar to starting a second service or a third service. Churches just need to see online as another form of having an online service or having another worship service. But I think the good thing is we've really seen how innovative and creative and quick to adapt churches are. Because the churches have scrambled and they put together things. Some of them aren't, again, with the best equipment, but I mean, we're there. We're there. We're present in the community. The gospel message is getting out. In fact, the gospel message is probably getting wider spread now than it ever has. The Christian church has always wanted to evangelize the whole world. But it was really difficult to do that when you had to take 6 months to go by boat over to, say, India or something as a missionary. Well, now with the internet, the gospel can be around the world, in real time, So there's going to be people watching this broadcast right now who may be in India. It's just crazy. So I think and I hope that churches will keep doing online. I hope that they'll improve their equipment. One of the things that I've noticed is that most churches, the pastor continues to preach from the pulpit. And depending on the cultural situation of the church, that's probably okay. But just like George, you and I are talking right now, we're on a headshot. People are just seeing our shoulders and our heads. That's a very personable medium. It's like looking at a newscaster on TV. And I think what I would say to most pastors is, when you're online, talk as though you're talking to one person. It's like you're in that person's living room and you're talking to them and you're looking at them and you're looking them in the eyes. And so I think preaching takes on a different feel online. It's not preaching to a crowd. It's more like you're sitting there talking to someone in your own living room, face to face. And the church services I found that seem to go over the best are the ones where the pastor's sitting there at a table and just having a conversation with the people online. I think in most cases that works better than having the pastor standing at the pulpit preaching. However, I've seen some good services where the pastor's preaching from the pulpit too. But I think for a lot of pastors, if they would just talk to people, don't preach at them, just talk to them right now online. I think that's probably the way to go. It reminded me of years ago, Franklin Roosevelt during World War II used to have what he called fireside chats over the radio. And people would turn on and he would just, President Roosevelt would just talk to people in a calm, assured way of what was happening with World War II. And people felt like he was just sitting in their living room talking to them. And I think that's the way pastors probably should do it. Preach the same message, but do it conversationally. And I think that will sell better. If I can use that word, it'll sell better to the people,
I think
again, I've seen some wonderful messages from pulpits too. But I think the pastors who communicate from the pulpit do it very relationally. Look in the camera, look straight in the camera like you're looking in people's eyes, and just talk to them.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. McIntosh. Talk to us a little bit about how to minister to different generations in this virtual reality. There are older saints that may not be used to and never thought they would ever be in a position where worship would take place virtually, that worship would take place in this setting, in this climax. What can we be doing to ensure that it's still reaching them? And then those that are Generation Zs now, making sure that they are still being reached in this time.
Talking to different generations has always been difficult. I think from a practical standpoint, maybe a church could offer help to some of the senior saints who are not as good with technology. Maybe someone at the church could call them, or if it's appropriate, drop by their house, help them set up their computer, that sort of thing, and show them how to log on to see the worship service. Any help we can give them like that. I know some churches have actually organized visitation teams of people who actually go over and maybe park in front of an older person's house and talk to them, with the proper social distancing, but talk to them so they have more of a personal touch from the church, a live person who comes by and stands at the fence and talks to them. Obviously, some churches have organized their younger people, maybe to go grocery shopping for the older people and then bring the groceries over and things like that. So I think that's good. I think in general, when we preach to a multi-generational audience, we need to be careful that we choose illustrations that communicate to each generation. So if you had like 3 illustrations, let's say in a sermon, you might try and pick one illustration that definitely communicated with an older generation, and maybe another illustration that definitely communicated with a younger generation, and maybe a third illustration that communicates with middle-aged people, something like that. Takes a little more work on behalf of the pastor and prep time, but I think if you can have a different illustration, that helps. One of the things I saw that was very innovative at one church that I was looking at online is the pastor would preach for like maybe 7 minutes, and then there would be a cutaway to somebody from the church who would share just a personal testimony of how they related to what the pastor had just said. And then it was, after they gave their testimony, the screenshot would go back to the pastor, who would preach like a second point. And then after he preached for maybe 7 minutes or so, the screenshot would go away again to another person who would give a testimony of how that applied to their life. And then it would go away again to the pastor, who would again preach another point for 7 minutes or so. And then it would go away to, the screenshot would go away to another person. And that person would kind of give a testimony. What you could do if you did that is each time you went away to a different headshot, you could have a different age person. So if you were doing 3 points, you could have 3 people of 3 different ages that you would cut away to, and then they would just give a word of testimony of how that particular part of the message impacted their life. You'd have 3 different people, 3 different ages, talking. I think that would communicate very well to a cross-generational a group of people, particularly now, because it's difficult, as you know, to stay online for 30 minutes. We've got a new word that's being used today called Zoom fatigue. Zoom fatigue. People are tired of being online. And what I noticed with this one church, when the pastor preached like 7-minute sections, and then it would always cut away to a person from the church who would give a word of testimony. And that kind of relieved that fatigue because you got a different voice, you got a different person. But again, I think, wow, you could have a different person of a different age every time. And that would speak directly to different ages. You're honoring each age group by having a different person share a testimony. Now, if you didn't want to do that 3 times in one sermon, maybe this week you could preach, and then maybe you could have an older person at the end kind of give an invitation. And then maybe next week you preach, and maybe you have a younger person give an invitation or something. You could weave them in. Or some churches online are still giving announcements. You can have a different age person give an announcement each week. Each person have one person give the announcements, but have it be a different age person. So again, this takes a little more work, to think it through and strategize about it. But I think it can be done. It can be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think those are great. Those were great suggestions and ideas. As it relates to, again, this notion of multi-generations, what are some of the things in this virtual reality that as we come out of, if I could restate that, as we come out of COVID-19 and start slowly integrating back into our normalcy, What are some of the things that you feel that will be the new normal once we come out of COVID-19 that pastors and church leaders need to be mindful of?
I don't think we know yet for sure, but I think one of the new normals is that we've cracked open the online egg, so to speak, and we can't put it back. I think some people are going to find that they will go to church online. They can sit home, they can drink their cup of coffee, they can sit there in their pajamas and watch church. I think there will be some people who find they enjoy church online. That's why I hope churches don't think they can do away with their online service. I think they need to keep it up there, and I think they need to keep it improving, because I think there will be some people who, they, even if they come back to church, they're going to find it a lot easier not to come back every Sunday. We had already, before this happened, we had already seen a trend in America where a committed churchgoer actually only went to church 2 Sundays a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I grew up, when you went to church every Sunday. We went to church Sunday night. We went to church Wednesday night.
Yeah.
I think this online experience, some people may show up to church one Sunday and then watch it online 3 Sundays. I don't know. We're going to see. I don't really know what the new normal is going to be. I think we're going to see a flood of people coming back, though, because I think people are hungry for personal touch. There's an old statement that I think is still true. It used to say, high tech, high touch. High tech, high touch. And it basically meant that the higher we got involved in technology, the more we needed high touch experiences. And I can see that right now. People are involved in high tech by being online, but they're hungry for high touch. People want to hug each other. They want to shake hands. They want to give fist bumps, They want to sit in Starbucks or some other coffee shop across a small table and have a person-to-person, face-to-face conversation. So I think we're going to see a surge of people back to church because they just want to be together.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think that's part of that new normal. What are some of the things we can do to value relationships coming out of COVID-19? I think that's going to be the key, to try to sell people on the fact that you need one another. You need to feel one another, touch one another, interact with one another. What is some of the things that we could do to sort of re-escalate the value of personal, intimate relationships within a construct of church, actually?
Right. In preparation for coming back, I think the number one thing that all churches could work on is their guest welcome. Make sure that your guest welcome team is together online, making plans of how to really make that guest welcome experience the best it can be. Because people are going to come back, and you need to have people there greeting, shaking hands. There needs to be refreshments. Whatever, as far as the governor will let us have refreshments. I was on an airplane just about 2 weeks ago, and they told me they couldn't give me coffee because it wasn't in a can. So the airlines are only handing out stuff that can be sealed, either in a can or a package. I'm assuming when we come back from this that we'll be able to have coffee and donuts or whatever. I hope so. But I think the welcome teams of our churches need to be really prepared, and prepared better than they have been, to welcome people. And tied to that is connecting people beyond just that first Sunday. So reinstituting home small groups, or at least online small groups. Maybe saying to people, you've enjoyed being in an online small group. Why don't you join a face-to-face small group? And trying to assimilate or absorb people into the structure of the church, the networks of the church through the small groups. I think the most bang for our buck coming back is to really emphasize the welcome ministry and the connecting ministry. And most churches had welcoming, connecting ministries before we went into COVID-19 sheltering down. But I think they really don't go back. If you're a pastor or a church leader watching this, don't go back and try and just throw it all together that first Sunday back. You need to be online with your teams, your welcome teams, your connecting teams, and you need to be making plans and organizing now online, and maybe have some meetings face to face before that opening Sunday so that you're ready. It's the old thing. You only have one chance to make a first impression. And so that first Sunday back there's going to be a lot of first impressions, and let's be ready to make them good.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. That's very insightful things. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things that we need to be aware of as far as medical and all those realities, in trying to, make sure we slow ourselves down, to be cautious of those things. So in that, we're blending now virtual church with in-person church, and now you got to make both quality. So you got to make sure that the in-person experience meets a certain level of quality. This social distancing taking place, many people with masks on, and then at the same time, it has to be inviting to a large percentage of people, probably most likely 50-50, 60-40, that will stay back and say, hey, I'm going to do virtual worship for a little bit longer.
Right. Again, I'm not an expert on the health aspects. I think we have to follow the guidelines that are given to us by the government, the safety guidelines. Obviously, there's going to be guidelines for cleaning and disinfecting and all that sort of thing. Maybe wearing masks, stuff like that. Maybe social.
And that's what I meant. I apologize to state the beginning of the question was stated wrong. In that there will be people with concerns about health.
Yes.
They will not all come back at once, or if they come back, they may come for that first time, but then after that, so you still have to manage both a virtual church or virtual worship experience, and then at the same time, a new quality in-person worship experience with the restraints and guidelines that are now placed upon us.
Right. Well, in the town where I'm at, I looked at what a couple of the churches were doing, and some of the churches were asking people to indicate online which service they wanted to attend. So one of the churches here has 2 services on Sunday morning and an evening service, but the evening service is the same as Sunday morning. It's just in the evening. But they were asking people to RSVP which service they would be attending. And then they had, sort of a cutoff number that only so many people could come, because they were separating people in the service. They're also giving them an opportunity to indicate which Sunday they're coming. So I think that they're saying to people, if you're going to come, we're going to social distance properly. And so we'll let you choose which service you want to go to, and then they limit how many people can come. They're also advertising to people and giving them permission, if you don't feel comfortable coming, it's okay. And I think that's good for churches to actually say to people on the website or in person, look, folks, we're going to be meeting again, but if you don't feel comfortable coming for a while, it's okay. We're still going to have church online. We're still going to have small groups online, and it's okay. And then when you feel comfortable, we'll be ready to welcome you back. But I think churches are wrestling with this, how to do it. And I've heard of some churches also asking people who have, say, a last name between A and M to come the first Sunday and the third Sunday, and people who have a last name between L and Z to come on the second Sunday and the fourth Sunday. So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. I think we're all kind of learning as we go along.
Yeah, I think you're right. What are some of the requests that you've been getting in the midst of COVID-19? Has there been seminars, and what are the topics that people are asking you to speak on?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't been getting many.
Okay.
I work in helping churches improve their guest welcome, improve their evangelism and outreach, and their leadership development and stuff like that. I think for most people that's been put on the back burner. I think that they're just dealing with the technology issues a lot. I have been recommending, to people, certain other people to go to, to get help maybe with technology and things like that. But really, I haven't been getting many calls. People are just not as interested in the normal aspects of church life right now, because I think they're overwhelmed. Honestly, I think pastors are overwhelmed, and other church leaders, in just doing the online, and trying to figure out how to keep people connected, how to do pastoral care. How do you do a funeral online? How do you do a wedding online? I mean, we've all seen those on Facebook, people doing weddings online, and things of that nature. My granddaughter just got married about 2 Sundays ago up in Seattle, and I officiated the wedding. I was able to fly up there and do it, but we were planning on how am I going to officiate the wedding online. Fortunately, it worked out. We were able to have 12 people together for the wedding, so my wife and I were able to go. I just think people are overwhelmed right now and tired. I think people are tired.
Yeah.
And so hungry for that face-to-face fellowship that churches are renowned for. But I really think that once we get back and everything kind of goes back to normal, that people will, again, be interested in, how do you do evangelism? How do you, connect people in the church, and, some of the basic challenges the pastors have always had historically. But right now, it seems like it's on a back burner.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the books that you've written. I know it's an unfair question that you're most proud of. Well, maybe this is better, that you feel has been the most helpful to the kingdom. What books have you written that you feel is the most helpful to the kingdom?
The one that I noticed has been showing up on Facebook a lot right now is a book called Taking Your Church to the Next Level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a book that has some help for small churches. How do you take a church from, say, 35, 40, 50 people up to maybe 80, 90? And then how do you take a church from 80 or 90 up to 125 or so? And then how do you take a church up to a couple hundred, and how you take a church up to 400? And just even this last week, I've seen several posts on that book that people have noted that has been very helpful to them.
Mm-hmm.
That book also deals with younger and older churches because, as we know, a lot of churches are struggling. Some say 80% or more of churches are plateaued or declined. And most of those churches tend to be older churches, churches that are 50 years or older. Not the people, but the church itself is 50 years older. And, there's just a natural loss of vision. When a church is a brand new church, there's excitement, there's vision, there's hope for the future. And as churches age, they accomplish many of the goals and visions they had at the beginning. And they kind of lose a sense of hope for the future. And so another book I wrote that's been really popular lately is called There's Hope for Your Church. And it's dealing with these churches that are struggling and trying to help them rethink a new vision for the future, a new vision for a new day, a new ministry that's healthy and vibrant, reaching people for Christ, where the word is preached properly and that sort of thing, So those are two popular ones. There's Hope for Your Church and Taking Your Church to the Next Level. If anybody's interested in looking at those, they can go to my website, churchgrowthnetwork.com, and they'll see everything I've written there.
Absolutely. We'll point people to there. Share this page. If you're watching, please, ma'am, please, sir, share this page. Go to www.churchgrowthnetwork.com. We have the general with us on Church Growth. He is an expert among experts on the subject. He's been gracious and kind enough in the midst of his tremendously busy schedule, being a professor, being an author, being a speaker, being a coach, to be with us on today. Talk to us about anything you're thinking about right now in the future, or things that you would like to write on. If you're not working on anything currently.
Right now, I'm working on a book. It's called The 10 Hats of a Pastor. And it's a study of where pastors put their time every week. And, as pastors, we all know we wear different hats. Sometimes we wear the hat of the preacher, and sometimes we wear the hat of the counselor. Sometimes we wear the hat of the church administrator. Sometimes we wear the hat of the social activist in the community. And so I did some research, and I found that there's really about 10 different major hats that pastors wear all week long. And they often wear 2 or 3 at the same time. But I did a study, a survey over the internet to find out, ask pastors, where do you actually spend most of your time? And I'll give you a peek into it. It's not surprising. The number one hat that pastors wear is a speaker's hat. Whether it's preaching or leading a Bible study or speaking at a community event or whatever. The number one hat that pastors wear is the speaker's hat. And the number 10 hat, which is the least worn hat, is the social activist hat. We've heard a lot about the need for pastors to be involved in their communities. Get to know the mayor, get to know the fire chief, get to know people at the Kiwanis Club, get involved in the community. That's still the least hat that most pastors wear. Now, this is a conglomerate. The study, of course, is an average of all pastors. Some pastors, might be more highly involved in, say, social activism than other pastors. But based on the study, the number one hat was the speaker's hat. The number 10 hat was the social activist hat. In the book, I talk about each hat in 10 chapters and give ideas on how pastors can wear that hat better and more fruitfully. for kingdom ministry. I'm writing the last chapter right now. There's 11 chapters, and then I'll send it off to the publisher this month of June. And they tell me it'll be available in spring next year. And
Okay.
so, that might be something that your listeners want to look for, the 10 Hats of a Pastor. There's my next book is actually going to be called Flying Solo. I already have a contract for it, Flying Solo. And it's going to be a book aimed at pastors who are the single pastor of the church. So they have no staff, no paid staff. And so it's going to be mainly to help pastors who are doing it all by themselves. And most of them will probably be in smaller churches. But that's my next project that I'm working on. And then the next project after that is going to be called The Portable Pastor. And we've got a lot of people going into ministry today who don't go to seminary, who don't go to Bible college. Some people are business people who maybe are able to walk away from their business at age 50 and go into ministry. And they just don't go back to school like a seminary or anything. Other people are just younger people who feel like God's called them to ministry and they don't feel like they need any kind of seminary education. So they just go out there and start pastoring, or maybe they start a church. And so I thought of the idea of providing some sort of resource for them that would be a quick reference guide where they could just have it on their computer, or they could have it in a paperback book. And let's say they have to do a wedding. Maybe they've never done a wedding before. They could look under weddings and it'll give them 2 or 3 pages of here's what to do. Or, maybe there'll be 2 or 3 pages, of course, on how to do a funeral, or 2 or 3 pages on how to do communion. Or anyway, the tentative title is The Portable Pastor. The idea that you can carry this little book with you anywhere you want, on your iPad or your computer, or just in a paperback book. And it's there if you're a pastor and you find yourself in a situation you've never been in, you look it up. And it's not going to be a complete reference, on how to do each one of those, but kind of a quick reference, so that pastors can, particularly pastors who have not had any training in a seminary or anything, or even in a Bible school. It's just a quick reference guide so they're approaching some aspects of ministry, with some guideline, some guidance. Wow. So that's my next 3 projects. Yeah, but let me tell you, I've got a 4th project that is a difficult one, but I'm working on a book called Searching for Father. And I had 4 fathers by the time I was 9 years old. And I think in a way, throughout my entire adult life, I've been looking for mentors who could be like fathers to me. And fortunately, God has over the years brought into my life older men who have been guiders, mentors, guiding me and giving me advice and helping me in life, in marriage, in ministry. And, God says in the scripture, he says, I will be a father to the fatherless. And so this is becoming a difficult book for me to write because it stirs up a lot of personal emotions. But I think there's a lot of men and women out there today who are looking for a father figure in their life. They didn't have a father who was there and guided them, and for many reasons. And I hope that this book will, serve as a spiritual help to people who are searching for father. Because I know I searched for my father for years. And I had to realize eventually, I found Father in God himself. And so that's an ongoing book. I don't know when it's going to be released, because every time I start writing it, sometimes I get so emotional I have to put it down, and I can't keep working on it. It just stirs up too many deep emotions in my life. But one of these days I'll have it done.
Yeah, we'll be praying you through that. That's a
Thank
very
you.
important topic.
I think it'll hopefully be a big help.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. Take us through your writing process. How does that work? What gets from blank page to a hardcover book on somebody's bookshelf or bookstore or through Amazon? What's that process?
I usually start with an idea. If I come up with an idea, like Searching for Father, I'm old school, so I use hanging file folders in my file cabinet. So I will take a hanging file folder and put a tab on it that says Searching for Father. Or maybe I'm going to write a book on church revitalization. I'll take another file folder and put church revitalization on it and put it in there. I probably have about 10 file folders or 12 file folders going right now. They're just ideas. And what I do is, when I'm reading or maybe working through the scripture or whatever, if I find something that tends to fit that general topic, like Searching for Father or church revitalization or something, if I see an article on the internet, I'll print it off and I'll stick the hard copy in that file folder. If I am reading another person's book and there's a story or something, I'll photocopy it, put it in that folder. If I'm reading the Bible and I see some passage of scripture that grabs me as that's important to that topic, I'll write it down on a piece of paper and put it in that file folder. And so what I do is I just collect articles, stories, testimonies. For instance, in my book, this forthcoming book on Searching for Father, I had a student one time at school, and for a semester, they were my research assistant. And I had this young man go through the entire Bible and note every instance of a father relating to his children, whether it was a man or a woman. And so he went through the entire Bible and found that every time there was a story or something of a father relating to their children. And so that's in that file folder. Another time I had a research assistant, a young lady, and she went and interviewed about 20 students at Biola University about their relationships to their father. And some of those stories were amazing stories. Amazingly sad, amazingly wonderful. I mean, just crazy. And she typed all those up, and I've got that in that file folder.
Wow.
I was reading Parade magazine in one of the newspapers a while back, and there was an article about some of the famous people in Hollywood and their relationships to their fathers. I clipped that out and put it in that file folder. So what I do is I start these idea folders, and then I start looking for information, stories, statistics, and I fill that file folder full. Now, that could take 2 or 3 years, but when a file folder gets to be about 3 inches thick, then I say to myself, it's time to write a book. So I take the file folder out. I give myself about 2 days of time when I can think about it. I sit down and I go through that file folder and looking at the stories, the topics, the issues, and I try and come up with what an outline might look like for a book. And then what I do is when I have an outline that seems pretty good to me, let's say it's got 13 chapters, I'll get 13 file folders and label them chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 through 13. And then I take that big file folder I had, and I'll go through and I'll look at a story, for instance, and I'll say, okay, that fits in chapter 12. And then I'll look at some statistics and I'll say, well, that fits in chapter 1. Or I'll look at stories like from people relating to their fathers, and I'll put that in chapter 6 or whatever. So I take that big file folder and I separate it out into the various chapters that are going to be in the book. At that point, then I can look at the chapters, and maybe I have nothing in chapter 3. So I know I got to do some research on that chapter. And so I can look at how I've spread out the research I've done, and which chapters are strong, which chapters are weak in terms of research and information. So once I am able to fill up the empty slots, the empty chapters, for me, I find I can write best if I focus on writing for a long period of time. So for me, like on this last book, 10 weeks ago, I decided I'm going to write a chapter each week. And so I took 2-3 days each week, starting about 10 weeks ago, and I sat down, I pulled out my file on chapter 1, and I wrote chapter 1 and then put it away. And then the next week I pulled out file number 2 and wrote chapter 2. And then the third week I pulled out file number 3 and wrote chapter 3. Now these are rough chapters. I mean, they're not polished. But I took 10 weeks. I did one chapter a week. It took me about 2 or 3 days to write each chapter. And now I've still got chapter 11 to go. This book only has 11 chapters, the 10 Hats of a Pastor. Okay. So I got to finish chapter 11. And then once I have it done, I'll go through and edit it, and then eventually send it off to the publisher. So that's a quick overview, maybe more information than you want.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think a lot of people can glean from that,
Sure.
that process. Tell us about.
I was just going to say, if that's of interest, we can do another phone call someday like this, and I'll actually show you my files. I can take you into my office and show you, what I do.
Yeah, let's do that. I want to do that. Yeah, definitely. That would be a great interview. Tell us about your journey into professorhood, to studying in the seminary, and how's that worked, and then how's that benefited your journey in ministry?
I think going way back as a pastor into the 1970s, people used to say to me, Gary, you're a good teacher. Honestly, they didn't say you're a good pastor. They said you're a good teacher. I think that the body around me, the Christian body around me, has always affirmed that I had teaching gifts. And between pastoring and going to the university, I worked for 3 years as vice president of consulting services for a ministry out of Pasadena called the Institute for American Church Growth. That ministry was quite large back in the 70s and 80s. It's no longer around, but it really was the first church consulting ministry in the United States. And I worked for them for 3 years. And it's through that organization that I started writing and started consulting with churches. And but I always had kind of a desire to teach in a seminary. And so one day I called up the dean's office at Talbot School of Theology and asked to speak to the dean. And the secretary put me through. And I just briefly introduced myself to the dean and shared how I would like to talk to him about the possibility of teaching there. And we set up an appointment. And it was just one of those God-appointed moments. I didn't realize it, but they had some openings at that time. And the openings fit me. They fit my gifts. They fit my background. Um, and, you know, it was just one of those things where I went there and I was the right man. I mean, it was just a God moment. I look back at it. You know, I coach guys today and ladies today thinking about going into seminary or university teaching. And sometimes the jobs aren't there. Just like in any career, you know, there's got to be an opening and you have to fit that opening. And I look back, you know, it was just a God thing that opened the door for me to go to Talbot.
Wow.
You know, there's a longer story there, but that's a short one. I mean, it's just.
And what's your role there now? What's your role there now?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, what's your role there now? I know, but
my title is Professor of Christian Ministry and Leadership. And I teach also in the Doctor of Ministry program. I have a cohort called Growing and Multiplying Churches in the United States. And by the way, we're starting a new cohort in January 2021. If anybody's interested, they could contact me and I could give them information, or they could go on the website at Talbot. It's basically a cohort on church growth, evangelism, assimilation, church consulting. We have a module in there about how to be a church consultant, coach. But the first 2 years is all about reaching people for Christ in your community and assimilating them into your church.
Okay. And then what's the rest of the years like?
Well, we also talk about revitalizing older churches. And we talk about theology of evangelism, assimilation, revitalization. We talk about understanding multi-ethnic communities. You may be aware a lot of churches today are very interested in becoming multi-ethnic. And so there's a huge movement going on right now, just simply called the multi-ethnic movement in the USA. But more and more churches are deciding that, you know, they want to move towards having more than one ethnicity of people in their church. And we've got some grand examples here in California, some churches who have been able to do a great job of that. It's not easy, but it can be done. And so we spend about 3 or 4 days usually talking about, you know, how can you reach people of different cultures, different backgrounds, different ethnicities. I personally prefer, George, to use the word ethnicity rather than race.
Right.
Technically, there's only one race. It's the human.
Right.
It's the human race. And I think theologically that's true too. I mean, the scripture says we all came from Adam. You know, we all came from Noah and his sons. You know.
Yes. Yes.
We're all brothers and sisters. You know, this whole thing of race, that could be another conversation. But I mean, you're probably researched this more than I have. But there's only a human race. That's it.
Absolutely.
There's different cultures. There's different cultures. There's different ethnicities, for sure. You know, Hispanics worship different than people from the Philippines, and you know, Filipinos worship differently than, you know, people in Korea and you know, people in the USA. And I mean, there's different cultures. But God reaches all people.
Absolutely.
We spend about a whole 3 or 4 days on that.
Yeah, and that's a 5-year program.
It's 3 years of classes, 2 weeks a year, and then you do your dissertation.
2 years.
The average person takes 2 years to do their dissertation. So yes, it's a 5-year program.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McIntosh, for giving us your time today. You gave us some great things to follow up with you about, and I'm definitely going to ring you up. You've been a blessing to the Sinai Church. You've been a blessing to myself. You've been a blessing to so many other churches, probably even outside of your own knowledge. And so we thank you for that. And we look forward to talking to you soon and praying with you and breaking bread. Once we get through this, we have to get together and meet up again. It's been too long.
That is right, George. Thank you for having me on. I love Hurtt for the Hurting. I've visited you a couple of times before and
Yes, sir.
on what you were doing, and I love what you're doing here. This is a great ministry, so keep it up, and we'll get together someday, sometime.
Yes, sir. Close us out in prayer, please.
Yeah. All right. God bless.
Pray for us. Close us out in prayer, please.
I will. Lord, thank you for calling us into ministry and Lord, giving us a place in your kingdom to serve you. Lord, we're facing some difficult challenges today from many different directions. So Lord, give us as leaders of your church here on earth, give us wisdom, Lord, give us insight, give us love, give us compassion, but Lord, give us boldness to do the right thing that we need to do now to see people following you and becoming your disciples in this day and age, Lord. We thank you for it in your wonderful name. Amen.
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 Thank you so much, Dr. McIntosh.